are heading into a new series, and I forgot to say hi. I'm Mute. I get to oversee things here at St Augustine's, if someone was wondering what this guy was doing up here. And we are getting into a new series. Now, when in St Augustine's, when we kind of love a good teaching series, so we're going to be hitting this for the rest of the term. And it's a series around homecoming to Hokinga. So we're wanting to think about what does it mean for God to call people home. And why are we into this series? Well, probably two things. One, if you actually think about the whole Bible from Genesis to Revelation, it's a really big unfolding narrative. It's a story, if you think about it, from a Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve were given this job to create a home, not only for themselves, but in fact a home and a place for God to be with them also. Creation was seen as a temple, a place where heaven and earth met together. Now, of course, that process gets interrupted by humanity turning towards kind of thinking about we want to do things on our own bat and create things in our own way, and we want to make all the decisions, which kind of doesn't work out super well. But the whole end of the story, when you get to the end of the Bible, the book of Revelation, Revelation 21, you've got this wonderful picture of heaven and earth finally joined together, and this wonderful line that says, now God has made his home with humanity. And so you've got this big picture, really. If you think about the whole arc of the Bible, it's really one big, long story, not only the homecoming of humanity, but also God's homecoming to this wonderful creation that God has made. So we want to be thinking a little bit about what does all this mean, and unpack this a bit further. But why do this now? Well, we're in a particular moment where in the Western world, there's actually a great, kind of a number of people returning to the church. And we want to be thinking about what does it mean if Jesus is calling people home? What does it mean to kind of welcome people in? How do we be really great hosts and point people to what God is already doing and point people to Jesus? And so if Jesus is calling people home, then it's our job to welcome them in. And we are going to be drilling into what that kind of could mean for us at St Augustine. So we're going to be getting into that for the next 7 weeks. So if you're a guest, you think like, gosh, I'm going to go somewhere else for 7 weeks. That's fine. I totally get it. But all for you kind of locals all here, like we're going to be doing this for 7 weeks, come hell or high water. So, and it's going to be a really great time. I'm into it. But so we're going to kick this off with a reading. So if we could have our reading today. Thanks, Graham.
I'm reading from Luke 15, verse 1 to 7. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. "Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I've found my sheep that was lost.' Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who need no repentance." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Whakarongo ki te kupu, a te wairua ki te hahi. And together we pray, thanks be to God. Kia mā tonu tāna kupu, kia tātou. Amen.
One of the, who can complete this sentence for me? One of the great things about going away on holiday is in fact returning home. Coming home often is a great kind of feeling of whether it's been a short time or a long time, that sense of coming home is absolutely amazing. Particularly if home is a wonderful environment for you. That first cup of tea, that sitting on the bed afterwards, is a sense of kind of real, just relief. There's a sense of relaxing into being at home. I remember one of the times I felt this the most was, and I've talked a little bit about this before, is like when I was 18, I got to travel. I backpacked, I worked in Japan, driving trucks, And I did that for a moment with my brother. I was 18, my brother was 19. And then after we'd kind of earned some money, we backpacked through China in 1993, which at the time seemed like a reasonable thing to do. But as we got into it, it got pretty challenging, in fact, because obviously not many English signs, and it was a pretty challenging trip. But we found ourselves in Guangzhou with kind of a bag full of American dollars and a visa. And so what we decided we'd try to do is just go as far north as we possibly could. We had no time to get back to kind of anything. We kind of left jobs, or I hadn't even started a job. But we had some money, so we just thought, do you know what we're going to do? We're just going to try and head as far north as we possibly can. And so we took a train from Guangzhou up to Beijing. It takes 3 days to get there back in the day. And we kind of did all the things, and then we slowly made our way north to Inner Mongolia. So we kind of got as far as the train could go. We hopped off a train, we hopped into a minivan, we drove out into the desert, and then the minivan couldn't go any further, so then we hopped onto these little horses, little Mongolian horses, and then we just kept going. And we went going and going and going, and then we got through to the desert. You basically offload from the horses onto a camel, and then you go further and further out into the Gobi Desert, as far as we could possibly go, until we came to its little stone enclosure where there were some murets, and that's where we stayed. And that's as far as we could go. That's as far as we could go. Interestingly, as part of that situation, what we didn't know was actually someone else was actually following us. And we only discovered this as we came back to the capital city of Inner Mongolia. And when we got to the train station, there was quite a big kerfuffle, and basically a whole lot of police came in, and they accused my brother and I of being American spies. So that was kind of quite intense. Back in, it's intense now, but back in 1993, you did not want to find yourself in Chinese jail being accused of being an American spy. So we decided what we'd do is we had to get out of there. So we basically bought tickets on the black market. We jumped onto a train in midnight, traveled down to Datong. We then scrambled from there onto a boat in Shanghai and left Shanghai, took 3 days travel, ended up in Osaka, hopped on a plane, got home as quick as we possibly could. We got to Wellington Airport and we thought, gosh, we haven't phoned our parents. We forgot to phone Mum. So I thought, we better do that. She was annoyed, in fact. She was very annoyed. So we called, we said, look, we're half an hour away. She goes, half an hour away? And I thought you were in China. It's like, it's a long story. We're half an hour away. Can you come pick us up from the airport? Anyway, she was absolutely furious with us. And we got into the car, but man, just getting home, having that first cup of tea, taking my boots and pack off, and just trying to unpack all these events. And then that night, sliding into bed, oh my gosh, the kind of magic duvet of safety was over me. It was such an overwhelming experience. It felt so good to be home again. And interesting, the neuroscience around this is that feeling of home, that releases a kind of a rise in oxytocin in our minds, and also a decrease in cortisol. It's this idea that this attachment kind of chemical response that people feel when they are really well attached to their parents and they're really close as children. It's this echo of being nurtured and being safe in the arms of the one that created you. And it's that same feeling. Home generates the same feeling for us. It's an echo of being safe. It's an echo of being attached and being held safe and being relaxed. And you can be yourself because you're taken care of in the arms of the one who created you. Just hold that thought for a moment. It's an interesting study done in 2011 in Oxford University, where they do interesting studies. This is a really interesting study. It was from the Cognitive Science and Religion and Theology Department, and it was a study that was done including 50 researchers over 40 countries, and it was such a long study. What they wanted to do is they wanted to ask themselves this question: is religion innate to human beings, or is it culturally transmitted? It was a humongous study. And basically what was super interesting out of this is basically what they concluded. You've got to remember, the researchers, a number of them, they're not Christians. This is an Oxford University, right? This is where they do the real stuff, right? They do real research. And what they discovered is, in fact, that actually belief in God seems to be very hardwired into the minds and into what it means to be a human being. Now, that's very controversial because in the Western world, of course, we think, like, how can that possibly be the case? But in fact, this is what this research showed. And then enter into the chat fMRI studies that basically jumped off the back of this. And what the fMRI studies, the sort of functional kind of, who can explain fMRI just super quick? Basically, it's kind of looking at the way that what's working in the brain when you're thinking about certain things. So they did an fMRI study basically of people in worship and in prayer and time of meditation with God. And what was super interesting is a couple of things. Not only did this light up a huge amount of kind of neurological activity within the brain, but in particular, what it released was oxytocin and reduction in cortisol and reducing activity in the amygdala. And basically, it was a sense of actually being at home, that sense of being safe in God's presence. And what it seems to be is that this echo not only of what does it mean to be parented well, but also a deep kind of like a neurological reward for being connected to the one who actually created us. So why this is super interesting is that it seems to be the case that we're not just talking about something that's culturally transmitted. It seems to be hardwired into human beings, the need for the deep connection with the one who created us. And that is innate, that is wired into us. So that's not just something we're making up. This is actually what does it mean to be a human being. Why this is really important, why bring these studies up now, is that we're in a really, really interesting moment, as I mentioned at the start, where Jesus seems to be calling people home. Jesus seems to be doing this in a number of different ways. There's kind of a mass kind of return for people returning back to church, particularly in the West at the moment. Thinking about just keeping the data hot, right? There's a new study just came out 2 weeks ago by the Bible Society. It's called the Quiet Revival. And they basically looked at data between 2018 and 2024. And here's what it's showing us. Basically, this is the UK data. There's been a 56% increase in church attendance in the UK between 2018 and 2024. And that's quite a rise. But here's a really startling piece of data, which is catching everyone by surprise. There's a 300% increase in Gen Z turning up to churches in the UK. I was on a call earlier this week with my friends from HTB, and basically, again, a friend's church in Oxford. Basically, there's so many young people coming to all dates in Oxford University. It's broken it. It's broken the system. There's too many. They don't know what to do. This is the same also in this is the same basically throughout the UK. There's a massively sharp increase in young people coming to church. The next little bit of data is super interesting as well. 34% of those surveyed who are not church attenders said they would attend a church or would be interested in a conversation with God if only someone would invite them. 34%, right? That's quite a large number, isn't it? So there's a real sense around which we all, this is an easy invitation at 34%, right? This is really easy. This next part is even more interesting. 56% of those surveyed who are non-church attenders would say they would be open for having a friend or a family member who did go to church pray for them if they were asked. 56% of non-church people would be open to being prayed for by a friend or someone in their family who went to church if only they were asked. We are in a time of incredible openness, where Jesus seems to be calling people home And it's really an easy job for us. We're just going to make space and make room, invite people in. And so if you're here today and you've basically going, well, I don't even know why I'm here at St. Augustine's this morning, there's a real sense in which, potentially, or what's happening here is actually God's calling you home. And I want you to be really open to that and what that might mean. Because this could be one of the things that's actually really, really good for you. Right? So often we think about, church and becoming a Christian is about going to heaven when you die. Of course, that takes care of itself, right? Going to get into that. But it's actually about life before death. It's actually having ourselves returning to God and receiving the kind of life that God has always wanted for humanity. That sense of safety, that sense of being loved, that sense of being known, that sense of being seen. And once we've got that locked in, then we can really participate and flourish in the world. So if you've kind of got that sense of actually God's drawing me to himself, then that's pretty much what's going on. And welcome to the club. Right? You're not a statistical anomaly. This is actually happening everywhere. But not just in the UK as well. The Economist in March published these stats. I mean, this is from The Economist, right? It ain't got a dog in this fight. So basically, have a look at that last little point here of Gen Z, those born between 1997 and 2006. You can stretch that number if you like. There's a massive increase in returning to God, returning to the church. Within our own, closer to home, I mean, it's nice to know what's going on in the UK and the States, but here's an interesting little bit of data. St. Patrick's Cathedral, this Easter, 350 baptisms. I know, right? It's a thing. At Life Church, just down the road, 90 baptisms took place. It's absolutely phenomenal. In Australia, in Melbourne, there was 400 baptisms on the beach. In Perth, there was 350. A little less religious in Perth. It's a godless state. It's understandable. But all I'm saying that there's a real kind of a sense in which God is returning people home. God's calling them to himself. And so we want to have a look at this parable today because I want to just kind of invite us into a dynamic of what it might mean to experience this and to be part of this. So we're going to get to the Bible. Is that good? Okay, cool. Let's hit that. So Jesus basically, in this section in Luke 15, Jesus has been preaching in the countryside. And there's a number of people who have been gathered to follow him. It's a really large crowd, in fact. And then from within this large crowd, there's a kind of a small kind of a group emerging. The tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to listen to him. Now, tax collectors, this is not just meaning people who work for IRD. In 63 BC, the Roman Empire basically invaded Palestine. So they're basically run by the Romans completely. And so there was a deal basically, we're either going to grind you into the ground or we'll tax you. And they had this great kind of way of basically making sure they didn't just completely wipe people out. So they just taxed the people of Palestine at a really high rate. It's estimated somewhere between 80 to 90% of people's livelihood was taxed by the Romans. Now, they had an extra really kind of sophisticated system by which they would do that. But in a nutshell, if you became a tax collector, you bid to be the person who was able to collect that tax. You would basically, it was a tender system in order to do that. And so you can imagine the kind of, the cultural awkwardness of being a Jewish person whose job it is to tax your fellow Jews to give that to the Romans so that they could buy more spears to suppress you, right? That is an awkward cocktail situation, right? When you discover that. So we've got people in this situation gathered into listening to Jesus. And also you've got other people called sinners. That's quite possibly just Gentiles, people who are non-Jews. And into this context, into this conversation where Jesus is a whole lot of people gathered, you've got the tax collectors, you've got the sinners there who are just like non-Jews. The Pharisees, the religious elite, come along and they are grumbling. They don't like the situation one bit. Who are these people that Jesus is drawing to himself? Doesn't Jesus know that these are the ones who should be on the outside, yet Jesus is drawing them to the inside. Doesn't Jesus realize that these people are the problem, right? And we draw people in, and they are grumbling. It's interesting, isn't it, that one of the things that we can often do, this, I want to just talk to church people at the moment, but for those who are kind of on the reg here, one of the things that can be so off-putting is grumbling. Honestly, internal conversations, just grumble. It's like, oh my gosh, can we just watch that? It's very easy to do, is to have an internal grumble, right? And the reality is that we miss some of the key parts of here, which is actually the joy of actually what God has done. We focus on the small things and we miss the big things. It's easy enough to do. But really this grumbling it's about a Pharisee, a kind of religious elite, a group of people who have thought themselves superior to the others because of their achievements. Right? So it's an idea that, in fact, who we are, and I'm safe because of what I have built. Right? I am a person who is not like the sinners. I would never be caught collecting tax for the Romans. I would never be doing X, Y, and Z. I am this kind of person. There's a sense of superiority about oneself. And at the heart of that superiority is actually a sense of safety. I'm safe. I've built this amazing ladder of performance, and I can look down on those who haven't quite attained it yet, and therefore I am safe. And we do this in a number of different ways, right? And interestingly, you don't actually have to be a religious person to have this kind of attitude. A sense of grumbling, a sense of superiority is an equal opportunity sport, and anyone can give it a go. Tim Keller says this. He's got this really great line on this. If we jump to the Tim Keller quote, that'd be awesome. Let's go, Mike. I know. Oh, Tim Keller, he's like 2 slides up. Religious people are prone to pride and self-righteousness, but so are secular people. Secularism can produce its own kind of Pharisees. There are many moral ideas, e.g. being tolerant, open-minded, compassionate, that secular believe they fulfill better than others, leading to a self-righteousness every bit as condemnatory as those of religious moralists. Next slide. The human heart wants to justify itself to say, I'm okay because I'm better than others. Religion can provide that, so can irreligion. One of the ways that we just try to manufacture a sense of home for ourselves, manufacture that sense of safety for ourselves, is to run down others or to kind of build a ladder of superiority for others. But Jesus says and shows us a completely different way. And so he wants to say that what he is doing, he's regathering creation to himself. He's healing creation and making something new. And in order to kind of explain what's going on through him and what's going on in the world because of him, he tells them this parable. And he tells them the parable of this sheep that gets lost, right? And the key part of it here is, let's just jump to the key point, is where if one dynamic was that the Pharisees had a mind of superiority, we're trying to make us safe by ourselves, there's another way of being in the world, and it's all located on this one word here, and it's the word repent. So the word here the sheep gets found only because it repents. And that's basically, it allows itself to be found. It's a sense of turning our minds towards God or allowing God to find us. This is a completely different way of operating in the world kind of as a total framework. One way of operating in the world is a world where we try to build our own safety, our own security, our own prosperity, our own ability to thrive through attainment and by keeping others away. This here is a completely different way. This is a way of operating in the world that sees God present and sustaining all things, and we are safe and we get to thrive when we just turn our minds towards the presence of God and allow him to not only carry us, but also to celebrate us and to lead us home. That's what's going on here. We are sheep that were lost, and Jesus came to find us. And quite simply, it's the dynamic of allowing our minds to be turned to God, and all these other things can be actually just be allowed to dissolve away. So what we've got here is a dynamic of if God is calling us home, if God is calling other people home, the danger here is to think about we're safe because of our own attainments. We're not safe because of our own attainments. In fact, we're safe because God has found us. But if you're on the way home and you're sensing God calling you, and if you've kind of been just, why am I here today? The sense of actually God being present in our lives, the idea is that we just continue to turn our mind towards God and allow God to fill our hearts and our lives with His life, not try and generate it for ourselves. This is a life of not self-manufacturing. It's actually a life of receiving life from the one who has created all life. So we don't try to manufacture home for ourselves. We actually, home comes to us, in fact. Have a look at this quote from James Smith. Coming home isn't finally something you do, it's something that happens to you. You don't find home, home finds you. This is the story of actually, if our home is actually we are home with God, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God, as St. Augustine would say, then in fact what we need to do is allow home to come and find us. Allow God to find you. Wherever you're at today, you might feel like you're far away from God. Just allow Jesus to come and find you. Just turn your mind to His presence and hear His welcome. You might think that things are going absolutely fantastic in life, and that's wonderful. Just turn your mind to God and allow God to continue to fill your life and to celebrate you. You might feel that, in fact, I'm really facing a lot of challenges, and I feel like the tendency is to actually manufacture things for myself, and I do have formed a habit of actually putting other people down or a sense of superiority. Just let that go and just turn your mind to God. Don't focus on the negative. Focus on how to solve that by allowing God to fill your heart and turn your mind to God. This next little part from James Smith is super instructive. To be found is not to become something else, but to become who you are. To be returned to the one who made you is to be returned to yourself. Allowing God into your life doesn't erase our humanity, it makes it come alive. Right? Allowing God to actually find you, allowing God to turn things around, to run on an operating system of repentance, of turning our mind to God and receiving God's life, actually doesn't erase our lives, it makes it come alive, it makes us become who we truly are. The invitation that Jesus has is to come and join the party, join His family. And so when we take communion, there's a sense in which not only do we take this bread and wine to remember Jesus, we also are allowing Jesus to celebrate us and the return that has been made. Jesus is absolutely committed to each one of us, and there's that sense of us coming alive as one of the key things that His Spirit wants to do. So what we want to do is as we take communion today, we're going to take bread and we're going to take wine, and when there's a sense of which we're celebrating the return that God has made in our own life. But it's an invitation to not only receive that for ourselves, it's an invitation to go and be the kinds of people that actually can draw people also and welcome people into this. We reflect the person of Jesus most readily when we go and find others also.